I'm Arian, and this is Death the Podcast. Death is the destruction or permanent end of something. At Death the Podcast, we are looking closely at what happens when something ends. We listen, learn about, and discuss the stories that surround the subject of death. These stories bring up much more than feelings of fear and sadness. They offer opportunities for connection, for hope, and sometimes even for humor. Ultimately, if we are open to exploring death, we create greater potential to experience life. I'm really looking forward to speaking with my guest today, Allison Durant. Allison is joining us on Death the Podcast to discuss the subject of Motherless Daughters. Allison was in high school when she lost her own mother to lung cancer over 31 years ago. Allison went on to graduate college, begin a career, get married, and have 3 children when she reached what she calls a turning point in 2012. During that year, Allison began a Motherless Daughters group of New Orleans. The group was organized for girls and women who lost their mothers before the age of 25. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you.
I know, as we contacted you to do this interview, that so much in your life happened to change, right around that moment. And I just wanted to give you a chance to speak to some of that if you would like to, because it seemed fairly interesting that was the timing.
Yeah, it was. So, my mom died 31 years ago, and I feel like that has been such the defining moment in my life. And so when you contacted me to set up this podcast, my father had died the day before. And I was like, wow, now I've got something else to talk about when it comes to death. It has been my mother. I just thought it was so interesting because the experience of losing my father was vastly different. I mean, first of all, I turned 50 this year, so I'm an adult. And I was able to be present through his illness, and the way that things progressed with him was kind of this treasure hunt to figure out what was wrong with him. And it was really important to me to know what was going on. And I realized I connected that back to that feeling of being the child who had no idea what was happening with my mother's illness. And so it was like a panic. At one point he went to Houston, and I was literally like, how am I going to know what's going on if he's not in New Orleans? And it was, it turned out okay. There's phones and there are cars and planes that can get you where you need to go and to get the information. But just my wanting to be involved, I know it came from that anxiety of where I was when my mother died, which was uninformed, left out, to either their doing or my doing. Some of it was being 18 years old and I got better things to do than to go see my mother in the hospital. I've got parties to go to and friends to hang, you're just a kid. And so the difference was profound. I was so much more able to process it. Now, when he died, was I ready? No. It's again, it's coming. It's inevitable. It's going to be any day. And then when it happens, I was devastated. There were still things I wanted to ask him, still things I wanted to know, still time that I wanted to spend with him. I spent a lot of time with him in the last year, and my father and I didn't always have the best relationship because of things that kind of unfolded after my mother's death. And so, I could sit back and regret that, but I'm going instead to appreciate that year that I did have with him and knowing that it was limited. And so right before Thanksgiving, when my father was still alive, I had felt a lump in my breast, and I thought, oh, great. The last thing I want to do is tell my father that I have breast cancer. I just immediately, of course, my mother died young, so every time I feel something, I'm convinced that I'm, got a gargantuan tumor and I'm going to die. And so I started going through the screenings that they recommend, and I did not tell my father that I was doing that. I just didn't want to worry him. He had, was declining pretty rapidly at that point. And he died. And a week later, I found out that I had breast cancer. And I thought, well, this is a really cruel joke. I didn't want to have to tell him that I had cancer, but I really didn't think I was going to have cancer. I thought, you know what, I took my licks back in 1984. Nothing bad is supposed to happen to me. So I've always just kind of thought, well, I'm immune now. And I wasn't. So I found out that I had breast cancer, and I didn't have to tell my father. So that was a gift, I guess, in a way. But then I did have to tell my children. And so here I was, like, the biggest panic was my kids know that mothers die. Mothers die. They know that. They have watched me come to terms with it, deal with it, see my Motherless Daughters, friends, groups. Mothers die. And I thought, I am not going to die, but I just don't want them to panic and be fearful and scared. But I can't control that.
What changed about your grief and your loss of your mom when you became a mom?
I didn't realize until I turned probably into my 40s, mid 40s, that I was missing anything. I was so self-centered and short-sighted that that's the thing. I just was a doer. So I had my first daughter, and one thing that happened, and I hope you don't think I'm just going to say it, but when I first brought her home in her crib, and you're a mother, you can watch your child sleep, your baby, like you can watch them sleep for 24 hours. It's just the most. So I'm standing there watching her sleep, and I felt this like rush of air come through the room, and I just knew at that moment my mother loved me the way that I loved this baby. And as much as, maybe she went and smoked cigarettes and went off and died, or, I just felt that this is how my mother loved me, no matter what. And this is how, I just felt like immense love for this child. And after that, like, I never really thought, oh, if only my mother were here. I was angry because it was hard. I had 3 kids in 3 years. It was tough.
Yeah.
And I have a husband, and he's supportive. So I didn't know that that's what was going on. I didn't know that's why I was so angry, but yet I couldn't ask for help. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know who to ask for help. And I didn't realize it until later when I got sober, like that's what was going on. I was really just suppressing that extreme grief. I didn't know how to address it.
Well, asking for help, I think, connects us with our vulnerability,
right?
With our, as you said, fear, sadness, all of those things. I think come from asking for help. Inherent in that is that I need something I don't have.
Right. I need something I don't have, and that's a sign of weakness. And I am not weak. I am going to plow through this because I have to.
And yet also, like, I love what you just shared about what you felt looking at your daughter, because it seems like with that new life and that surge of motherhood feeling, that also connected you with what your mother felt for you.
Mm-hmm. It really brought me great peace.
How is the loss of your mom incorporated or not incorporated into your current family?
It's interesting you say that because, now I have 3 teenagers and they are so funny because they tell me that I'm crazy and controlling and I need to know everything. And I just kind of laugh and I'm like, call me when you're 40. And also I tell them, like, I am going to parent you. Like, it is so important to me that I be present and parent them. Like, I take that more seriously than the breath I breathe. I mean, it is just ingrained. Like, it makes me a little bit crazy because anyone that's a parent of teenagers, I think, would agree. It's a whole lot easier to be lax and say, you know what, you're right, go ahead. Go to Baton Rouge for that concert. I'll see you tomorrow. Or what, that's a lot easier than putting your foot down and saying, no, you're not going to go. And if you want me to tell you why, I'm going to tell you why. But I really don't even have to tell you why. And it's so important to me to be a mother because I know that we all are just have the time we have. I mean, any given moment, anything could happen to any of us. And I'm not trying to be a fatalist, but I recognize that, like, the time is now for me to impart values and morals and structure and, eventually I can be their friend and I'll try to be there for them emotionally and, support them in ways too. But it's sort of an interesting, because some parts of me want to just jump forward to like playing and not being the parent and just being friends. But I also know would be a train wreck. And I'm sure there are a lot of things I'm probably lax on. Anyone that knows me and hears this might be like, yeah, right. But I do try to, it is just part of me, I think. It's fearful. It's part of my fear that, I won't be there. I'm here, so I'm here to parent you.
And that's what I was wondering as you were talking, is that, given that you lost your mom as a teenager,
mm-hmm.
And they're right around that age or getting there.
Yeah, well, my mom, my oldest daughter is 17 and she's about to graduate. And my mother died the month after I graduated from high school. But my mother was sick in high school. She had lung cancer. So part of even losing her came with the diagnosis because my parents just, and I don't know how I would handle it. I'm not criticizing. It just is I basically was abandoned from that point on. The focus was on her and treatments, and she eventually was paralyzed and in and out of the hospital. So my, last year at home as a senior, she was in the hospital for a lot of it. So I really didn't have a parent at home. My father was either at the hospital or at work, and maybe he'd be home, for an hour. I worked at a dress shop right next to Fat Harry's dress shop. That sounds so old-fashioned. It wasn't a dress shop. It was a clothing store. And I lived off of cheese fries and would work until 8 o'clock at night and go see my mother in the hospital and go home and try to study physics or something, whatever. Needless to say, my grades plummeted and I wasn't parented.
And yet your awareness now of the importance of your presence and attention on your children as their parent. I imagine that's got to be somewhat informed by everything you're saying now. How valuable that is.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a whole lot harder and less glamorous.
Yes. As this interview is all unfolding, these things are happening. It's like, okay, I've lost my mother now my father has died, and now I'm facing my own mortality, my own disease, my own, it's not that there isn't a good prognosis, because there is, but it's just a little bit ironic. The timing of it, the age of my children. So I feel like my mother's death, now is not the only, thing that I have related to in this past year when it comes to death.
Right. You have other things on your mind and in the forefront. And yet I'm just struck by, as you're talking, that the wisdom that you convey seems so much informed by the loss you've experienced.
I chose to be completely open to share with them not the minute, but the afternoon that I found out. And I plan to let them walk the walk with me and not keep anything a secret. Tomorrow I go in for my port for chemotherapy, and my kids said, we want to come. And I was like, you just want to come because I'm going to be under anesthesia and you're going to make fun of me. And my 14-year-old said, no, Mom, I want to support you. And I was like, wow, give her the opportunity to decide what she wants to do or what she wants to hear, or, and it's just a very different approach than what I was dealing with when I lost my mother.
Well, and that seems so conscious for you, that you're and deliberate, that you are, well, this is not news that anyone would want. And I really love the theory that, like, bad things shouldn't happen to people where bad things have already happened.
Right.
And gosh, I wish more than anything that were the case. But here you are with really hard, painful things in your rearview mirror, but still very present for you. And you're so open about it. You're giving your children, it seems to me, the gift of being able to do that same thing. And I mean, I realize you made the choice to share this with them, but it gives them a lot of choice moving forward to not be that child that was in the dark, not really knowing where everybody was or what they were doing.
We all just do the best we can with what we're given at the time.
Allison, you identified 2012 as a turning point for you. Can you describe a little about that to me?
2012 was a big year for me, primarily because it was the year that I went into recovery. I got sober and started working with a therapist. And having removed sort of that medicator that I had been using for so long was what opened my eyes to the realization that I had not grieved the loss of my mother, which had happened, back in 1984. And it was such excruciating pain that I knew I had to do something to try to get through it. And that's when I started seeking out other people that were like me, because I did not know at that time people who had lost their mother at a young age. I knew of one other person who was 16 when her mother died. And she and I connected immediately, but she was, married to a friend of mine, and then they got divorced, and then she went away. It was, a very fleeting connection. And so I just longed for finding people like me.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel like that connected you more to your own grief?
It made me aware of the feelings that I was having that were a result of the grief, as opposed to the result of my life, necessarily the places where I was in my life. I connected it back to the grief, because people who had lost their mother at a young age could say, yes, I feel that way too. Even though I was married with 3 kids, one of the women in my group had never been married and had no children, but yet she had similar feelings. And so it was that realization that kind of connected all the dots for me and made me feel less alone and weird and baffled by the feelings that I was having, because it was complicated and it was complex, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand how I could be feeling so sad when I had so many gifts in my life.
What commonalities did you notice then, or do you notice now, amongst women who've lost their mothers, especially at an early age?
One of the things that I found in common, and not everyone in the group had lost their mother 25 years ago. For instance, one of the girls in our group had lost their mother 4 years ago. I mean, we had a 17-year-old in our group too who had lost her mother when she was 14. And one of the so even like having that real recent loss, I think one of the things that we bonded on was this feeling of abandonment and the idea that we were the only ones that were here to take care of ourselves all through into our adulthood even. Although there are people who cared about us, it's still this feeling of, because we were left without the blueprint, there was no map for us. And so it was like ours to forge ahead. And we did so with a vengeance. Some, in my case, destructive in some ways, but determined and aggressive and confident in ways, but yet very unsure and unstable in others. So it's kind of a juxtaposition, I think, of two sides. And part of it is we all agreed that because we lost that maternal guide, that we really didn't, we just felt so kind of like hanging, and that feeling of hanging forced us to not so much reach outward. I would say that we all pretty much, for me especially, like I didn't look to the I didn't know that I felt like the only person that was going to be able to do anything was myself. I never thought that there was outside, like professional help or support group or anything that was going to help me through it. Like I didn't know how to ask for help either.
For you, was that part of what the purpose that alcohol served, as a buffer between even knowing that you needed help?
Absolutely.
And then not knowing, I imagine, where to go.
Yes, very much so. I think that it was definitely that companion and that friend and that guide and that person who told me everything was going to be okay. I think that's where alcohol came in for me, for sure.
And yet you accomplished so much.
Well, a lot of people do.
I'm wondering what the differences are between the period before you got sober and since, in terms of your relationships and your achievements and what you've done and how you've done it.
God, I don't know. That's a good question. I think that, for one thing, before getting sober, I had very few. I was either happy or I was mad. Like I didn't understand that fear was behind the anger. I was just angry, but I couldn't understand why. And I think once I had a clear head and clear thoughts and people that I connected with that had similar experiences, I could understand that make that connection, that the anger was related to fear. And it's so much of the fear of that unknown, that fear of me leaving my children motherless, fear of not doing things, to the best of my ability. Just lots and lots of just insecurities that can go back to not having that stable person, that maternal figure and I know a lot of people have mothers, but they don't have great relationships with them. So I'm not saying that that's like the end all be all to a healthy person, but I think that it's really just interesting for people, people who have lost their mother. I think it will eventually catch up to you if you haven't dealt with it from the very beginning. Like I see one of the girls in my Motherless Daughters group is 18 and she joined. I mean, it's amazing the strength that she had to show up at this group where we read Hope Edelman's book, Motherless Daughters, in between softball practice and school, and share her feelings with us and, read with us and listen to us, and we would learn from her. And now, she's a sophomore at Stanford. Like, she's walking through this and not away from it. And I think for me, I just kind of walked away from it thinking that I'm 18, I'm good, I'm an adult. I wasn't 12 when my mom died. I'm fine. And I walked away thinking that there was no reason why I needed a mother or why I needed that in my life, and until it caught up to me so many years later.
And tell me a little bit about how the group is run and what that looks like.
Well, the group in the beginning, when none of us knew each other, it was run kind of formally, and I can be kind of a serious person. So it was run, with sort of an opening serenity prayer, and we would go around the room. We go around the room and we say our name and we say who our mother is and our mother's name, because for a lot of people, me especially, my mother's name is never spoken. And so that was impactful from the very beginning, to say my name is Allison and my mother is Jane. And she died when she was 49, when I was 18 years old. And so we go around the room and start like that. And then Hope Edelman is the person who wrote what I call the Bible on Motherless Daughters back in 1995. In 1995, she wrote a book, and it was based on a compilation of interviews that she did with women who had lost their mother at a young age. And it really just speaks to, suicide, long-term illness, short-term illness, accidents. It talks about all the different reactions to these things. And so we just sit and we read for about 30 minutes. We read the book and then we discuss what we read. And then in the end, we always end up chatting and catching up. And now, people in the group have become close friends. We just attended one of our Motherless Daughters' weddings. There's just really, for my 50th birthday, which was the year I outlived my mother, my Motherless Daughters group gave me the most special present, which was a photograph of myself and my mother when I was young. And they blew it up onto a canvas and they wrote on the back of it. I mean, it's just so it's just this special place, that we have to go and be together and kind of share in that experience.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It sounds like just the energy of connection that happens with a group of women who share that one piece, important piece, that things unfold in a powerful way.
Yes, it really does. And this past year, we had a woman who came, and I met her through my father, and she lost her mother 67 years ago. And to listen to her and watch the tears well up in her eyes, for her to say her mother's name and how special it was for her to be there, it's it doesn't go away, and then you have someone who lost their mother 8 months ago, and it's this, it's similar, it's just this feeling of tremendous loss that they can connect on. So it's really pretty special.
Well, and it also helps one understand why running from that kind of what can feel like a bottomless pit of pain, your ability to understand both sides, the running away from it and the also facing it in a day-to-day, sober, clear way, that both are pretty understandably painful.
Yes. But it's definitely less painful to face it. I'm here to say.
We're here to be an advocate of that for sure. Yeah.
Face the pain.
Well, and I mean, amazing that you hit a turning point and woke up in that. I mean, I think that kind of awakening is rare and not easy. And you've kept people in your life on both sides too. If people want to learn more about the Motherless Daughters group of New Orleans or the Mother's Day luncheon, or what's the best way to connect?
Oh, that's a good question. We have a Facebook page, which is sort of how we communicate, called Motherless Daughters of New Orleans. But you have to be invited. So if you would like to send an email to my email address, which is Allison Durant, ALLISON DURANT @mac.com, you can reach me that way. And also Hope Edelman has a Motherless Daughters page that has Motherless Daughters groups all around the world that you can search by location.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you. This was really wonderful experience. Thanks.
You're welcome. The word death evokes all sorts of personal feelings, images, and stories. These stories are compelling, and sharing them connects us more fully to life. I'm Arian Elfont, and you've been listening to Death, the podcast. Join us for our next episode in this series. My guest has been Allison Durant. To find out more about Motherless Daughters support groups, you can go to hopeedelman.com. This show is produced and engineered by Eric Merle. Our theme music, It Happened, is written by David Milling and is performed by David Milling and Charles Milling. To hear more of David's music, you can go to his website, davidmilling.com. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher or some other podcast app, if you could take a moment to rate and review us, that helps other people find us. You can find Death the Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. On all of them, we're called Death the Podcast. Death the Podcast is a production of INO Broadcasting.
You know Labor Day signals the unofficial end of summer, but not the end of your outdoor projects. Lowe's helps you do it right and helps you save with Labor Day deals throughout the store. Shop now and get 2 bags of Stay Green potting mix for $12. And keep your lawn looking neat and trim with a Craftsman 2-cycle 17-inch gas string trimmer, now $20 off at just $119. Whatever's still on your to-do list this Labor Day, do it right for less. Start with Lowe's. Offers valid through 8/28. Soil offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii, U.S. only.